Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, I will be going into episodes 760 through 762, which will cover manga chapters 810 through 812, and the battle in the past rages on as we learn the horrifying details of how the Minks were defeated by Jack. Alright, so synopsis. We are further told how the battle between the Minks and Jack's forces wore on for several days until Jack decided to use a very underhanded tactic of chemical warfare with Caesar's poison gas, quickly overwhelming the Minks. And it wasn't until the Curly Hat crew part of the Straw Hats arrived to help where they were saved just in the nick of time. Alright, so differences. The beginning of episode 760 sees a bit more fighting between Jack and Nekomamushi, as well as the Minks swapping back to Inuarashi. In the manga, we see a few panels of them trading blows, then immediately it flashes ahead with Wanda saying that the battle continued for 5 whole days. So it wasn't really as long as the anime portrayed it, or at least we didn't get to see as much of the 5 days in between. And as I mentioned in the last episode, the reveal where Chopper tells Luffy that it was Caesar's gas that Jack used on the Minks to win the fight was a moment that was used as the cliffhanger to end chapter 808 and was meant to take place just before Inuarashi fell asleep talking about Shanks. But it was pushed later to this episode, and I think it was to preserve the reveal of just how the Minks lost this fight. Because in the manga, we knew that long before we even saw this section, almost a chapter earlier. But I think that with the anime, they wanted to preserve that sort of twist that this is the reason why that they lost the fight. I don't know which one is better. Honestly, it really makes no difference. But yeah, it was definitely a change for sure. The last thing is when the Curly Hat crew first arrives on Zou, the scene where Sanji asks Brook to protect Nami while he, Chopper, and Caesar investigate more into the forest has much more dialogue and filler scenes, like the trio walking through the forest with Chopper saying he senses something bad, and then back at the gate, Brook and Nami talk about what they might think could have happened here. While the manga, it's actually a little confusing as it goes from the panel of Sanji asking Brook to protect Nami, then immediately Sheep's Head crashing or chasing Tristan happens, and you're wondering why Sanji isn't there. And the only way this is indicated in the manga is that Oda uses like these double black lines where he shows like a very small slit panel where you don't really see much, but it has 2 black lines that separate the next moment to the next to kind of his shorthand to say that some time passed. But it's not as clear. So the anime does give us a couple added scenes to give us a sense that time has actually passed, which I think is actually a good thing. I think the anime does a better job of conveying that time passage, whereas in the manga, it just seems like if you're not really paying attention, it's almost like that one scene happens and then the next something completely different happens, and you're wondering where some of the characters are because they're not there anymore. So yeah, kudos to the anime for kind of better conveying that. Alright, so let's get into the episodes themselves. So continuing on from the last set of episodes, the battle raged on for 5 days as Nekomamushi and Inuarashi's forces traded off every time the day changed, but Jack and his forces stayed fighting the entire time without pause, at least I think. Although it is mentioned that they do keep getting reinforcements. And as Wanda explains it, they were beginning to push back Jack's forces, except one thing was that Jack was still this monstrous immovable object. And good lord, that's an insane thing. This guy seemingly kept fighting for 5 days straight, 24 hours a day, with only a few breaks, I'd imagine, or maybe not. Who knows? It's not really made clear what Jack was doing this entire time, whether he was actually on the battlefield all the time, or if he traded off at some point. The other crazy aspect was that despite Jack's forces being continuously defeated, as Wanda puts it, they kept coming from the sea like zombies. And like, just how freaking big is this crew? And this isn't even the main guy of the crew. Sure, he's one of the commanders, as you would say, but Kaido is his captain. So if one of his top commanders is this strong, just how freaking strong is Kaido himself? Like, it's definitely some food for thought and really puts into perspective, like, what dealing with an emperor must be like. On the opposite end, though, the 2 dukes also fought him to a stalemate as well. Neither is able to really gain ground on each other, so Jack then turned to one of the most dirty and underhanded tactics we've seen in One Piece, the use of chemical warfare. And only the dirtiest of dirty villains in the series have used this. Think Don Krieg, Caesar, and now Jack. Although Caesar's probably the worst of them since he's the one that supplied Jack with this poison gas. And Robin in the present connects the dots for us and Luffy as Caesar under the employ of Doflamingo was making weapons for him, and Doflamingo as the underworld broker, Joker, had sold these weapons to the likes of Kaido and other pirates. And this gas was some sort of a neurotoxin that paralyzed them, and they began to crucify and torture all the minks, despite them saying they know nothing about this samurai, Raizo, or the ninja. This whole scene is honestly hard to watch. The anime makes it a bit more palatable by obscuring most of it and much of it happening off screen, but in the manga, while it's mostly very similar shots, the blood and the faces of anguish on the minks as they're attacked and tortured are much more intense and graphic. The fact that the characters that are getting tortured like this look like animals hurts that much more, for that very reason. Like, we all hate to see animals in pain. And yeah, not to say that we don't like seeing humans in pain too, but there's something about like seeing animals like that because they're so innocent. But especially since many, they just look like animals, we keep as pets. It just cuts really deep seeing them in this much pain. And the cruelty on display is really hard too. Seeing Wanda in so much pain from the PTSD of that experience is also incredible writing on Oda's part and amazing acting by Fumiko Orikasa to bring out that raw emotion. And Fumiko Orikasa nails this as she is very talented and a very well-known voice actor to many anime and video game fans, as probably one of her most famous roles is Rukia, Kuchiki Rukia from Bleach, as well as Riza Hawkeye from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. And also, another place where you might see or hear her very prominent voice is she is the primary voice of Chun-Li in the modern Street Fighter games and its many spin-offs like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Infinite, as well as any of the other games too. It's back in the present we see that Inuarashi is awake again and expresses his gratitude towards Luffy for saving them. Confused by this, he shows them a newspaper of the news that the reason Jack withdrew most of his forces was due to Doflamingo's defeat at the hands of Luffy. And in this newspaper, we also learn Jack's epithet, which, despite how horrifying of a character he is, has a pretty awesome one. His name is Jack the Drought. Like, what an intimidating epithet. Like, he's literally a walking disaster, and it's not far off from what he's displayed so far. Then after this exposition dump, Inuarashi falls right back to sleep. It's almost like Oda needed a fun way to just convey this information to us, but didn't want to think too hard, so he just had Inuarashi wake back up, which is actually pretty clever and funny as well. From here, we jump to the perspective of the Curly Hat crew and their arrival at Zou, and the mystery of how they reached Zou is solved as they use Caesar as a hot air balloon to lift them up, which again is very clever and pretty funny how they keep using this guy. And I love how Caesar keeps getting used and disrespected. Like, he deserves far worse, but seeing him humiliated like this constantly kind of helps a bit for sure. And I don't know why I didn't come up with that when I first was reading this part, as it seems so obvious that they would, that would be their only way to kind of get up outside of somehow like Momo gaining control of his sort of dragon flying powers, which we all know wasn't going to happen considering how much he struggles to even like change, let alone use the powers. Once they make it to the gate that Jack broke down, Sanji and Chopper with Caesar go to investigate a little while he leaves Brook to protect Nami and Momo. And shortly after splitting up, Nami and them get encountered by Sheep's Head and Jinrumi, who are chasing Tristan. And I really like this moment where we get to see how Nami's mind works, and she just immediately figures out the situation that Tristan is the one that needs help and that Sheep's Head is the villain here, and immediately acts by grabbing Tristan and then ordering Brook to take care of Sheep's Head with a new attack called Soul Parade, Eisuban or Ice Burn, which is also German for ice rink, hence why the ground turns to ice like an ice rink. And Tristan's reaction to seeing all this unfold is very understandable, albeit a funny one. She's completely freaked out at a talking skeleton and a talking eel, which is Momo, and runs off with them giving chase to better understand what's going on. Although Sanji and them stumble upon that answer as they come across the Kurata City and the aftermath of Jack's attack, Chopper and Sanji are horrified at the sight of this, but Caesar, the scum that he is, knows exactly what's happened and has this disgusting look of pride at what his invention has wrought, but is then disappointed to see that many of the victims are still alive. Again, just showing how Caesar's inventions, while potent, aren't as complete as he would like them, kind of reinforcing his sort of inferiority complex with Dr. Vegapunk and all of his successes. Pedro then pleads with Sanji to help them, and especially Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, saying they mustn't die as the world is waiting for them, which obviously has a much deeper meaning that we don't know yet, but it is a very intriguing line, particularly since we just found out that Inuarashi knows Shanks, and probably by extension Nekomamushi does as well, so they have some sort of maybe connection to Shanks or Gold Roger or whatnot. But yeah, it is interesting to kind of note that these two have some sort of an important sort of role to play still in the wider story. But like with the torture scene prior, the aftermath of it is just as sobering and horrifying as well, if not more so, as we see that Jack not only tortured them, but mutilated them both by cutting off Inuarashi's left leg and Nekomamushi's left arm. And while it's bad in the anime for sure, but the manga, it's really crazy to the point where I was like, I'm surprised that Oda got away with this level of graphicness. I mean, it's not anything crazy, but the image of the two covered in blood and blood dripping out of their cut off limbs is pretty intense, even with just those two added little details. Like, yeah, the anime definitely strips away a lot of the blood, and outside of like a small little patch on both of them, but in the manga they're drenched in blood. And yeah, even though it is black and white, it's still pretty rough. I'm not gonna lie. But even in this scene, there's a slight moment of levity as Pedro speaks to them. Chopper exclaims, "An animal that can speak!" And Sanji's like, "You are too." And I love the lack of self-awareness jokes among the Straw Hats, with Luffy calling things out as being weird when he himself is one of the weirdest people. Chopper, that he's also a talking animal, often gets freaked out by weird talking things. Brook being spooked or scared by things, even though he's probably one of the scariest looking things on the planet. And then Frankie, like, being a pervert and calling other people perverts and weird. It's kind of a thing that happens pretty much with most of the crew. Now, Caesar, gloating and just kind of gleefully giddy at the success of his poison gas, his cruel effectiveness, is so freaking annoying. You just want to punch him through the page or the screen. Thankfully, Chopper is there doing that for us, as he repeatedly headbutts Caesar with a football helmet on. And Sanji and Chopper threaten to force him to create an antidote to the poison that he created as he flies off to help Nami. And this is where it catches back up to what we saw during the end of Dressrosa, as we saw it happen kind of in real time. Caesar then creates an antidote gas that neutralizes the poison called Roko. And I know it seems kind of obvious, but the name here is kind of silly because the poison gas, as he mentions earlier, he named it Koro, which is kill, or a part of the word kill, as in korosu, or murder, which is also korosu, or koroshi. So you take that Koro part, and it's shortened, but the antidote reverses the effects of the poison, which is reversed in its name, so Koro becomes Roko by swapping the two hiragana characters, or the two syllables, and so that's how he came up with the name. And in fact, the chapter's title is called Roko as well, which I find pretty funny. But once the gas has been cleared out, as the crew walk through the ruined city, Wanda attacks Nami, thinking that they're part of Jack's crew, and even tries to sacrifice herself by taking her and Nami out with a dynamite. But one thing I love is that usually Nami would be freaking out if she were that close to death, but she's incredibly calm here. While having Wanda pinned, she does nothing more to show that they don't mean any harm, and eventually Tristan and Pedro come to vouch for them, that they're here to help and have nothing to do with Jack. Nami is always so amazing when she knows she needs to be strong. Most of the time she's like screaming like a scaredy cat along with Usopp, but when people need her and there's no one else, she is as strong as anyone mentally and spiritually, that I think a lot of that comes from being raised by Bellemare, who also herself had like this quiet strength as well. And this whole section is really gut wrenching, but also very relieving at the same time. I particularly get really emotional when Chopper runs up, taking command with what they need to do to save everyone from the poison, and Wanda getting very emotional and having sort of a breakdown at the sight of, help finally showing up in the form of the Straw Hats. And this scene is amazing. I love this scene, showing everyone coming together to help and treat the wounded and injured. And even though it wasn't a combat scene, I think the use of the Overtaken soundtrack was a great choice because it had just as much impact on sort of an emotional level. It wasn't a combat scene, but I think it has that same gravitas. And everyone else uses their talents and skills to help the people, with Sanji and his rejuvenating cooking skills he learned during the time skip, and Brook playing music to ease everyone is also so good. And I'm basically like how Frankie reacted after this part, just a pile of emotions seeing this scene. From here, since night has fallen, Chopper wants to go into the whale forest to check up on Nekomamushi, so they make their way there, and along the way the story continues as the mystery of what happened to Sanji and Caesar are still unsolved, and so Brook now takes over the storytelling duties. And he begins by discussing that there is a possibility that Sanji may not return despite his message saying that he would. Brook begins by outlining that while Zou is a mysterious island that is near impossible to find even with a log post, because of the fact that it moves, they made two big blunders. One was allowing the Big Mom pirates, to overhear that they were headed to Zou while they were trying to escape, and that they failed to realize that there was a resident of Zou on board Big Mom's ship. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my god, why didn't I realize that earlier? Like, that's so obvious. Like, of course, Peckhams is a mink, and so they knew how to find them. And I was not expecting to have like a sympathetic response for Peckhams, like an antagonist who was pursuing our heroes, but seeing his emotional reaction to his home laid to ruins was actually pretty impactful and a really emotionally hard-hitting scene. But then it immediately turned back into worry as he believes the destruction is perpetrated by the Straw Hats and gets incredibly angry. It then cuts back to the Straw Hats continuing to support and help the minks recover, with Sanji now relieved of his duties. He just basically goes around all with his flirty and pervy ways, just nuzzling up to every beautiful mink lady with the Garuchu greeting, which is again annoying, but I did love the bookend to this gag where the male mink also want to Garuchu with Sanji, and he just flat out says no. That was pretty funny. I'm also a huge fan of Caesar being put to work nonstop to make more medicine and antidotes. The crazy thing about this scene is that he tries to disguise himself and pass himself off as some other person named Cedar for the purposes that he doesn't want to develop a good reputation. Like, this guy is so evil that he will go out of his way to make sure that he's known in the world as an evil and terrible person, to the point where he would make up a false identity to make sure that his bad reputation stays preserved, which is just wild to me. Like, this guy is the worst person, like, in the story so far. Well, no, the Celestial Dragons are far worse. But anyways, Peckhams and Bedge eventually make their way to the fort, furious and ready to beat the ever-living crap out of the Straw Hats, but instead he's told that the Straw Hats actually saved them all. And honestly, I didn't expect Peckhams to have such a genuinely heartwarming reaction here. He just shows like just pure, sincere relief and gratitude, as he's just glad that everyone is safe and alive. And I was not expecting this from one of the higher ranking members of the Big Mom Pirates. I guess for me, when it comes to antagonistic crews, usually the change from antagonist to sympathetic supporter happens far after the main story, and usually in a cover story afterwards. So like, characters like Hachi, the entirety of the Baroque works, Perona, etc. The only two that I can think of off the top of my head that converted within their arcs were Gin during the Baratier arc and Robin, of course, during Arabasta. Although the last one doesn't really count, since she would ultimately end up joined up with the crew. So, that was a special situation. But yeah, so this was definitely something I was not expecting to see with Peckhams. I guess my point is that I haven't been conditioned to expect this from an antagonistic character during the arc, especially one as fierce and aggressive as Peckhams is. And I like it because now it creates a situation where characters have to make real and complex choices, and it tells us what kind of person they are. Not just as a character, but as the person with their own thoughts and values. And I was genuinely curious to see which way this would go. As I read this chapter wondering, would Peckhams let them go? Would he defect? Would he still pursue the Straw Hats? Would they come to some sort of a deal? It was just genuinely interesting moment of just what is he going to do? And the one thing that was, of course, looming over this potential happy moment is the presence of Bedge. And Oda made sure we were well aware that Bedge was there to prevent any sort of amicable deal being struck. Because every time Oda showed Peckhams overjoyed or emotional, you would either have Bedge right there with this sort of stern look in the same frame kind of looming in the back, or it would just straight up cut to Bedge's face. Like you knew exactly what he was thinking seeing this unfold. And he knows that Peckhams has gone soft and that even if Peckhams shows some mercy, Bedge is going to have to step in and make sure the job is done. Sanji, being the ever-observant, thoughtful, and kind one, deduces that things aren't going to go as smoothly as just handing Caesar over, and that would just subdue the beef with the Big Mong pirates. So he takes Brook with him to have a secret meeting. And I love this moment where Sanji kind of like nods to Bedge to meet him out back, and Bedge just kind of like also agrees silently. And yeah, just kind of away from all the minks who he, obviously feels that they've already been through enough. They don't need to see another conflict with two warring pirates crews that have nothing to do with the minks. And yeah, they want to basically keep everything as far away from them so that they have fewer things to suffer about. And in this meeting, Peckhams comes out with nothing but gratitude for Sanji and the Straw Hats for saving his home and his people, which again, I just love how these characters are so layered. Like, Peckhams isn't just some thug muscle for the Big Mom Pirates. He has his own feelings, his thoughts, values, and morals. And it's just not something you see all that often from a character like Peckhams. They're usually very one-dimensional. They just serve their boss and that's it. But Peckham's so indebted to the Straw Hats that he is willing to report back to Big Mom that he let the Straw Hats escape and is willing to accept any punishment that may come from that. And in a weird way, he seems like a good guy when it comes to certain things. Again, it kind of shows that not all pirates are inherently good or bad. They're a mix of both, and many have the freedom to do as they please, but they all live by their own code. And again, that kind of highlights sort of the differences between a marine crew and a pirate crew. You have people who can think more individually like this. Unfortunately, Bedge also can think individually for himself, and he just happens to catch him off guard. But however, seeing this, Bedge on the other side of the coin is absolutely ruthless and sees this as nothing but weakness and fires on Peckhams in the back repeatedly. And I knew something like this was coming, but I never could have imagined something so freaking brutal. From the outset, it might seem like overkill to fire on Peckhams to that extent, but Bedge, despite Peckhams saying he's still new to the crew, probably knows just how strong Peckhams is, as we've seen on Fishman Island how tough he is and how durable he is, especially since he possesses the Kame Kame fruit or the turtle fruit. So he probably wanted to be sure that Peckhams wouldn't be getting back up, which is why he shoots him in the back before he has the chance to activate his turtle transformation, where he becomes incredibly tough and can, also probably covers himself with haki at some point as well. But yeah, one thing that you'll really kind of see as a theme with Zou is that One Piece has always had a good amount of adult themes and violence, but I feel like Zou has kind of taken a step towards maturing a little bit more and becoming slightly more graphic with heavier moments as the series is now, 15 plus years old at this point, and the kids that grew up, with One Piece who are like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old are now mostly young adults at this point, like in their mid-20s. But even for me, I was not prepared for how kind of heavy and dark Zou became with all the more heavier themes like torture, chemical warfare, and all of that, and PTSD, like you seeing all of that, and as well as just how brutally like Peckhams just gets betrayed by Bedge and stuff like that. Yeah, it does seem to ratchet up a little bit, and Oda is seemingly sort of maturing a little bit with his audience, which is which is kind of cool at the same time. But yeah, I definitely kind of worry about younger kids reading Zou. I mean, I think it was smart of Oda to mix Zou with sort of the more whimsical aspect of talking animals and just how, cute and fun they are once they are out of danger, and also just how cool they are too. So I think Oda chose wisely to kind of balance the two out with sort of the heavier, darker moments with sort of the fun and cuddliness of the mink animal people, which is kind of cool at the same time. But yeah, I think definitely Zou should be reserved more for older kids, maybe like at least like 12 or so, hopefully. Uh, Although I would say even if a young kid read Zou, it would be it probably would fly over a lot of kids what was happening. But some of the graphic images might be a little harder to process for kids. So definitely, I think Zou is a place where, you know, if you're a parent, you should definitely kind of like sit alongside with your kids when you read Zou. It's really weird to think about, like we're this far into the story, and yeah, we've seen some pretty crazy things and pretty graphic things, but I think Zou, yeah, there is a hard hitting nature about this arc, because of sort of the more mature things that seem to pop up in this arc. And anyways, yeah, we'll see how with this cliffhanger, how reasonable Bej will be, and what how Sanji and Brook will navigate the more ruthless Bej. But yeah, we'll get to see that on the next podcast episode. And yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, because that usually really helps, and also it makes me feel good. If you wanted to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing as well. That also really helps. And yeah, check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates if I ever begin posting there again, because I know I've been pretty lazy. But, as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Just one tiny sort of spoiler thing that I wanted to mention. It's only going to be like a couple minutes, so if you're interested in that, you can stay. But if not, I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Okay, so the one thing I wanted to mention in the spoiler section here is not so much like the big things that we will eventually talk about, with like Nekomamushi and Inuarashi being on both Whitebeard and Roger's cruise, and they were sailing around, and also just how important they are to the the Wano arc and all that stuff. But the thing I wanted to kind of mention that I kind of completely forgot about was when Wanda mistakenly attacks Nami, and she almost sacrifices herself by blowing herself up with dynamite. It's obviously very reminiscent of how Pedro would eventually go on to sacrifice himself during Whole Cake Island to save the Straw Hats by using, like, not just one, but like an entire, stack of dynamite. And I often wonder if Pedro got inspiration from this moment, or if it's just something that many of the Mink warriors are prepared to do, and so they just have dynamite with them all the time. But yeah, it is interesting that Wanda used almost the same method that Pedro would eventually go on to use as well. Yeah, I just thought that was very interesting. But anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to kind of mention. So if you stayed, thank you so much for listening to that, and hope to see you in the next episode. See ya.